My guest today on the After Dinner Leadership Podcast is Stephanie Chung. She's an international speaker, a board member, and an author. And she's channeled all of her amazing energy into writing a book called Ally Leadership: How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. It's a book that every leader can benefit from because it talks about how you get the best from others and particularly help you to tune in to others by asking, listening, learning, and then taking the appropriate action. I'm sure you'll find a lot of good information here, and as you do, please share it with others who will benefit. Enjoy. Welcome, Stephanie Chung, around the After Dinner Leadership podcast table. It's nice to have you with us.
Thank you. So good to be here. I'm very excited about this. I think we're going to have a good time, Simon.
I'm sure we will. And one of the things I love to find out from our guests is, as we're around this dinner table, what food reminds you of your childhood?
I would say McDonald's French fries. And here's why.
Okay.
I was a military brat, Simon, so I grew up moving every 2 years of my life. And whenever we would get new station, my father would be stationed in a new place, we would drive from wherever we were to wherever we were going. And he had this wonderful ability to make the road trip a mini vacation. So we explored the country as we were getting from point A to point B, right? And always in the car as we're driving and look at different sites and learning about the country or the state that we're in, et cetera, we would always buy McDonald's. And this is, I'm an old hag, so this is way back in the day, right?
Sure.
So we would have McDonald's and I would always get a cheeseburger with French fries. And I was that little kid that would eat one French fry at a time. Like I would savor these French fries. Probably took like an hour to eat them. But that's what I remember. I remember being in the car, doing a road trip with the family, going to our new adventure, wherever that new city is that we were being stationed. And a big part of that memory was my McDonald's cheeseburger. And I really, really savored the French fries.
I love that. And who else was in the vehicle with you then? You said family. How many were in the car?
So my dad, my mother, and my brother. It's just a family of four.
Right.
Now it's obviously much bigger, but it was the four of us, and my brother and I would be in the back seat, usually either playing together or fighting, ready to rip each other's throats out, right? one or the other. And I think the French fries helped calm some of that.
Great. I'd love to, again, take you down memory lane a little bit. If you can remember yourself in your early 20s, what was significant around that time for you? What was memorable about you in that time?
That's a great question. I think in the 20s, I was starting to really find my rhythm, not to the point where I have it now, obviously in my 60s, but, in my 20s, I was aware of what I wanted. Because I was that little kid, Simon, that grew up knowing exactly what I wanted to do, right? So I knew, because of my military background, my dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So I grew up around planes, hearing them take off and land my entire life. So I was that little kid that knew exactly what I wanted to do in life. So being in aviation was the thing. By the time I was in my 20s, I'd gotten my first aviation job. I was starting to get some traction, starting to get a feel for the business, loving every day that I had, the opportunity to go to work. And so I would just say 20s was really exciting from a career perspective. But I also then got married in my 20s, had my first child by the time I was 26. And so 20s were a really great time. But it also had its fair struggles, right? Because now I'm a working mom and I'm trying to juggle everything, and I work in aviation, which means I'm gone a lot. And so it was a great time, but it also was a time that I needed to really start to have some, reprioritize my life. Because when I got into aviation, I was, footloose and fancy and single, right? And then all of a sudden I'm married with a baby and, I have an intense travel schedule. And so I had to do some readjusting as well. But super grateful. I loved my 20s. If I could go back there again with the wisdom of a 60-year-old, I would.
Great. Well, we'll explore that, I'm sure. Who did you have at that time that you would consider to be a mentor? I use that term in its broadest sense because we use it more formally now. But was there someone around you that you would consider, they were like a mentor figure for me when you were at that age?
I would tell you, when I was starting out, because my first job in aviation was working at the airport. And so I don't know that I had mentors there, but then when I got
Yeah.
I had colleagues there, and we were all, again, we were all young and working for an airline. We could travel anywhere in the world, so we would go away all the time. So
Great.
none of them were mentoring me, right? It's just a lot of great friendships. But then when I got promoted and moved into sales, and now all of a sudden had a very professional job, and I had to learn about business etiquette and things of that nature. That's when I started to get more mentors. And a lot of times the mentors, for the most part, were my bosses. And whether
Yeah.
they were really great bosses and leaders or not, right? I think that you can learn something from everybody as long as you decide that that's what you're going to do. And so I think I didn't really understand them as we know mentors now. Didn't really understand it, but I would say my first boss was my probably the beginning of it for me. She taught me how
Yeah.
to, I don't know if she taught me, but I would emulate how she dressed, how she spoke, how she handled, confrontation. And being a woman in a male dominated space, and she was one of the few women, it's probably like three that were, that I had exposure to. I really watched and observed how she moved through the career, and I emulated a lot of that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Sounds great. And what was one of her key attributes that you admired? See, clearly her dress sense. But what else? What
Yes.
else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a funny story about the whole dress part of it, right? Because when I grew up a military brat, Simon, right? So I grew up around soldiers, and they all have a uniform. And then when I got my first job in aviation, I worked at the airport, i.e., I had a uniform as well. So I really didn't know how to dress outside of uniform stuff and uniforms that were
Yes.
given to me. So fast forward, now I'm in sales selling for a major airline, and the very first day I was in training, and then after training, I remember my boss, who wasn't that many years older than me, said, "Okay, Steph, I'm going to take you out. So get dressed or dress appropriately. I'm going to take you out tomorrow to meet your top accounts." Great. So I go, and I had no money either. I was just like
Yeah.
broke, right? So I scrounge up all the money that I can find, Simon. I go to the store, I buy a pantsuit, and I feel like I look like $1 million. I get into the office the next day. I'm excited to, spend the day with her, to learn from her, to go meet my accounts. Like, I'm so excited that day. I walk into her office, and she looks me up and down, Simon, and then literally turns back in her office and yells out to the assistant, doesn't even say this to me, "Cancel all of our appointments." I can't take her looking like that, and shut the door.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was my first experience. So I go over to her assistant, Jill, and I'm trying not to cry because I don't know what I've done. And Jill says to me, "Stephanie, ladies don't wear pantsuits to visit their top, like, in sales or whatever."
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, and I just remember going home and being devastated. And the truth of the matter, that was probably one of those pivotal days in leadership that I still remember to this day. Because had she done a little bit of research about me, right, she would have known she grew up on military base. She grew up around men, right? And she grew up
Yes.
only having uniforms. I didn't know what ladies do. I didn't know, right? I'd never been taught. And so, anyways, that was a pivotal moment for me. And so that's why I started to pay attention to how did she dress? How did she carry herself? What did she
Got
do?
it.
So that I could learn as fast as humanly possible. Because, there's so many other things I needed to learn, but how to handle myself was just as important as to learning how to hit the goal, right? Or, achieve the
Yeah.
quota. And so those are little things that shape how I lead today, but because I still remember the pain and the sting that it created many, many years ago.
Mm. Very
Yeah. So
powerful.
to
What a
answer your
powerful story.
question, what
Yeah.
I learned from her was, how to dress appropriately, but I also learned how not to communicate certain things to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Great lessons. In fact, let's
Yeah.
continue that. What three leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier?
Well, the first one would be, how, and it's funny, this is what I named the book, and I know we'll talk about that later, but how to lead people who are not like you. Because what I had
Yep.
to learn in that process was people have a different upbringing, different thoughts, different how they communicate, so how I did things was not necessarily how everybody else did them. And I, as an early leader, needed to learn that. And I learned it the hard way, to be honest with you, right? Because I would say another thing that I learned was how to how not to leave, I always put it this way, how not to leave dead bodies in the process, right? Because
Yeah.
my personality is I'm incredibly direct, I'm straightforward, I say what's on my mind, and I say it when it's on my mind, right? Those may
Yep.
sound like great traits, but not necessarily the best traits for leadership. I had to learn how to temper some of that, because it
Hmm.
wasn't about it getting off my chest, it was about me being able to understand with somebody that I was getting ready to get some stuff off my chest with, right? It was about me trying to understand what is it that they did or didn't understand or know, right? So asking questions. Then I had to, from there, once I understood why they may have made the mistake, let's say, because nobody shows up to work looking to make mistakes. So if they
Yeah.
did, then I need to understand why. What was it? A lack of training, lack of understanding? Maybe I didn't communicate it right. Like, what was it that got us here in the first place? That was the first thing.
Yep.
The second thing I then had to realize is, now once I understand that, then I can start to explain, or, once I ask questions to understand, now I can start to kind of teach, train, yeah, develop. But I didn't know that at the beginning. So, how to lead people who are not like you was really important, because not everybody
Brilliant.
thinks and processes information the way that I do it. So that, I would say, that's
Great.
one of the ones that I learned. And then, something I'm learning now, I don't know that this answers your question, but something I should have known back then, but I really am fanatical about now, is how to schedule in thinking time. Because I think as leaders, there's so much on our plate. And if we're not careful, we're running around like our hair is on fire, and we're not doing first things first. And so learning
Yeah.
how to literally schedule in time to think is important. And then also, on the flip side of that, when you're leading, you've got team members asking you for, should we do this? Can I do that? They're asking a lot of information. And some of the mistakes I made when I was younger is I would just answer, and then it would become death by a thousand cuts, because I gave you an answer. But the more I thought about it, the more questions I have, right? So now I'm coming to you
Yes.
asking more questions. And now that the questioning may cause me and cause you to have to pivot from what I told you originally was okay to do. And so now all of a sudden it's just a painful process. It's painful for me. It's painful for my team members. And so I've learned how to not just schedule in time to think for maybe projects that I'm working on, but also to be okay as a leader to say, you know what, great question. Give me time to think about that, and I'll get back to you. Now, I don't need to
Got it.
take 2 years thinking about it, or even 2 weeks, right? But it's okay to really think through the pros and cons of it, so that when I give them an answer, most likely we don't have to pivot. We don't have to redo things, because I've thought about it, I've thought through all of it, and now I'm giving you an answer, versus making up us both go a painful process of death by a thousand cuts. So I would say
And
those are
what's
my
the
three
third?
things.
What's the third? What's
Well,
the
the
third
first one would
lesson?
be lead people who are not like me to understand that.
Yes.
And then to also, when I'm communicating,
On
don't
the dead
communicate.
bodies.
Yeah, don't communicate based on how
Sorry.
I like to
I got it.
communicate,
Got it.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
And then thinking time. The thinking time is the third. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah.
I
That's
sorry.
okay.
It's a subset of the first one. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I want to stay with you on that last one. I mean,
Mhm.
you're clearly someone with a huge amount of energy. I mean, it comes across the internet at great pace, which is fantastic. So I'm
Thank
really
you.
interested. How did you come to that recognition of almost that slowing down, that thinking time being a real asset? Because okay, so let me give you my full kind of thought process. I'm working
Yes.
with you. I'm a
Mhm.
team member of yours, and I would love that kind of energy and the power of it. And right, I'm going to get a quick decision moving over. And then if you switch gears to hold on, I'm going to process that. I'm going to just give me a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a few weeks, but a few minutes. That would be kind of counter to the typical energy I might be experiencing from Steph. So like, I'm just interested, how was that, or how is that going? I guess the transition of realizing,
Yeah.
right, I need this space to think.
Such a good question. So what I would tell you is, when I look back on it, right, as I think about this question, the things that were small decisions that could be made quickly, like I always say, If it's a decision that can take 2 minutes to make that decision, let's take the 2 minutes, right? If it's a
Yeah.
20-minute, let's take the 20 minutes. Let's not make a 2-hour decision for something that should have taken us 2 minutes, right?
Brilliant.
So the
Yeah.
reverse is true as well. So with that in mind, and to answer your question, if the decision was like, hey, Steph, blah, 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 and it was a quick one, and it's not going to be detrimental if it's the wrong decision, right, to the business or to the bottom line, then it's like, sure, here you go, boom, answer them, and they're off and running. Because usually I oversaw sales teams until I started overseeing companies. And so
Yeah.
salespeople, time kills deals, right? So we're moving at a different pace. And I like that. And I want them to keep moving at that pace. However,
Yes.
some deals are bigger than others and have a much longer term impact to the business. And so those are the ones that may require me. The deal is a little bit more difficult. It's, doesn't really fit the way that we normally process deals. And so now I've got to think through how to make this work. How do we get to a yes? What other departments do I need to, get input from so I don't mess up, the execution of whatever deal we commit to? That's when I'm
Yeah.
taking a little bit more time. And the team
Got
knew
it.
it enough to know, okay, she's gonna take some time, or she's gonna need the time to think through this, because I've got to also be able to present it back to them, my reasoning, so that they can go back to the client with either a yes, we can do it, or no, we can't, and here's why. Right. So I needed to really discipline myself, because you're right. I wake up with this kind of energy. Like, I have a lot of energy. And so I have to manage it as well. And part of how I've learned to do that is to make sure that I'm spending the time where I need to spend the time. And I'll tell you one thing that came out of it, that why I started to do this, is my team used to, because I'm running at such a rapid pace, what the team used to love, and I'm running at a rapid pace. What the team used to not always love, I'm running at a rapid pace, right? And so
Yeah.
there were times that what that meant is I then expected them, going back to leading people who are not like you, I expected them to run at my same pace. And so if they were giving me like, okay, Steph, we're going to create this new product or this new process or whatever, then I would, in my mind, it should take 20 minutes. Literally, it was a joke in the department, because they're like, in Steph's head, everything takes 20 minutes or less, right? And so we know that's not realistic. Some things do take 2 weeks, or 2 months. And so, because for me, I'm just like, I don't know, here's the answer, get it done. I'm on to the next thing. But what that would do is leave the team who knew it was going to take more than 20 minutes, leaving them in a stressed out predicament. And now, like, how are we going to get this done so that, in the time frame that's reasonable for her, when maybe my time frame wasn't reasonable on the front end, right? And so
Yeah.
those are some of the reasons
Yeah.
why I've had to really kind of step, as I professionally matured as a leader, I've had to really step back and go, okay, where am I adding value, and where am I, like, I always call them unnecessary stressors. Where am I adding unnecessary stressors to the team, to the process, to, where am I adding that I need to throttle it back a little bit? So that's what I've learned
Yeah.
over the years. And I'm still a work in
I love
progress, by
I
the
love
way.
that.
Yeah. hmm
Yeah, no question. And as we all are, and thinking about a recent experience I had, we're working with a leadership team, and we were doing a team build type activity, like a problem that they had to solve together, and the leader of the group said, right, we're going to need a leader for this. Who wants to lead? And he left just a fraction of a second, and no
hmm
one had responded. So he's like, okay, so I'm going to lead. But he actually didn't give them any space to say, hey, yeah, I'd like to lead, or I'm going to do it. He assumed the position. He's very good, by the way. He's one of my idol. Not idol. I'm inspired by him. So this
hmm
is not a style that he has typically, but it was very interesting. Like the pace he was operating at, he didn't give the space for someone to come in. So
Yeah.
and I think it's a really interesting understanding those waves within the team. This leading people are not like you, as you say. Of how do you engage someone that's maybe processing at a slightly different pace, but still has got brilliant ideas, excellent potential, but just not operating with the same processing speed? I guess is key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such a good question. It's interesting. It's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking about something that I've learned to do that actually helps me slow down the pace, right? And
Hmm.
so, for an example, is I would also, and I encourage leaders to do this, especially as I know that, the type of tribe that you attract. This is so incredibly important, is to show your vulnerabilities to your team. that actually by default starts to slow things down as well. And it
Yeah.
gets them engaged, and it also allows you to develop them a different way, right? And so, for an example, when I'll just use an example. Maybe it's the beginning of the year. The board has given us new sales numbers, that we need to hit as a team, and it's probably an increase. And as salespeople, they're always going to moan and groan at those increases, right? and so
Yes.
and so at the beginning, one of the things I would kind of just, okay, guys, here's where we need to be, and here's how we're going to do it. But that's not productive, right? Because a lot of it is, at the end of the day, the increase is my number, but I'm breaking it up into little pieces based on their territories and what their numbers are. So it's really all of our number. It's not just mine. And so what I learned to do was to, sit with the team, have a whiteboard behind me, have everybody there, and say, all right, guys, listen, here's the new numbers that we have to hit for this quarter, this month, this year, whatever. It's an XYZ% increase. And I could really use your help on how we're going to get this done. And then I don't
Yeah.
say anything. And then everything they say, even if because sometimes what happens with leaders is we know when we hear the idea if it's not a good idea, or we know it's one we
Sure.
can't sell upward, right? But
Yes.
during that time when I would open up the vulnerability, my goal at that point was just to get them thinking like I'm thinking, right? I want them to think on a higher level, because I'm trying to
Yeah.
ultimately develop them to take my spot one day, right? And so by showing the vulnerability of like, I don't really know how exactly we're going to do it, but I could use your help and would love to get your thoughts. And then allowing them to openly say whatever ideas they had. There were no bad ideas. Every idea they said, I wrote it on the whiteboard. Every single one. I didn't go, well, okay, hold on. I don't know if we can do that. I didn't shoot it down at that moment. In my mind,
Yeah.
I might have been thinking, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. But that's not this.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to get accomplished here, right? What we're trying to get accomplished
Yeah.
is just every idea is an idea. Once they throw it out, we've got full whiteboard and maybe even overflow. Then I go, guys, like this is fantastic. Like, whoo, I'm excited. Like this number is going to be easy. So we got a lot of ideas up there. I would love for now. We got to kind of go through. We Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So how do we narrow this down to like the top 3 ideas? And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, now they're fighting and defending their ideas, right? And I'm just letting it go. Like, healthy confrontation is a good thing. So I'm just letting them go for it. It could take us 30 minutes, could take us an hour. I don't know. Because I want them to get this down to 3, right? What are the
Yeah.
top 3 things we're going to do? And then that way, once they get it, they argue, they go back and forth. They're selling, with each other and whatnot. Then we get those top 3. Now we've got something we can get accomplished. So the team feels like these 3 things can get us the increase that we're looking for. And they all had some input, and they've all had to sell or resell each other. And now we can start to function and start to build out based on those 3, add some meat to the bones, if you will.
Great.
But, I think that was a long answer to just kind of answer your question. But what that does is that slowed me down, because it's easier for me, right? It wouldn't take me 2 hours I can create a plan. Here we go. Here's yours. Here's yours. Here's yours, right? Like, let's go,
Yes.
right? But that's
Yes.
not necessarily the best way to do it. And it didn't develop them. And it also helped me hear them, going back to leading people who are not like you, hearing how they thought about the idea that they were putting on the table.
Yeah, that's great. I've used a methodology not dissimilar, but as one of the components of it is creating, just like if we've posed a problem to solve, whatever that is, that we've got this sales target, or I've got this new process we've got to implement, whatever the topic. And then before anyone responds, just give a minute. We often call it a beautiful silence. 1 minute. No one's
Yes.
allowed to speak, for people to write down their ideas and their thoughts before they then share it, so that everyone's committed something to paper, and everyone will have a voice. But that minute of beautiful silence is really interesting, how it kind of just forces a thought process in, and allows people of different pace and focus to get their thoughts together in an appropriate way.
Silence is a powerful thing. Usually when I'm talking to salespeople, I always tell them silence is the most powerful thing you can do right after listening, right? Is
Yeah.
because once you ask the question and you remain silent, he who speaks first loses, right? Like there's an awkwardness in that silence, and people have to get really comfortable in learning how to function in silence. It is a powerful thing when used correctly.
Absolutely right. I'd love to hear from you. You mentioned about your first aviation job, and you were working for an airline. You moved into sales. As you think about your career journey, ending up, well, not ending up, but one of the senior positions as being president of an aviation company, private aviation company, which of those career transitions did you, looking back, felt the most risky?
Ooh,
And you did it anyway. I don't know, maybe that's the bit I'd love to get into. Like you kind of made a jump and
yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm not sure entirely how this is going to go, but I'm going to go with it. Yeah. Was there something like that that you took?
Yes. Easy answer for me. When I left, when I was no longer a VP of sales and I became a president of a company, that
Yeah.
was the riskiest, scariest move I had made up until that point in my career. And the reason why is leading a sales team is very different than leading HR, legal, IT, finance, and sales, and marketing, and pilot. It's just very different, right?
Yeah.
And so I was trained and developed and equipped to lead sales and marketing and customer experience kind of roles, right? But then all of a sudden now I'm leading roles that I'm not familiar with, and nor am I trained in. Right? How do you lead
Yes.
the legal department? Right? Right? How do you lead IT or finance? And so those were things that I wasn't familiar with. So that was a little bit scary for me. The real scary part, though, wasn't just that. It was that they had brought me in because they wanted me to transform this company from a commodity more into a luxury um, company, right? And so,
Yes.
but in aviation, listen, it's a male dominated space. Let me be really specific. It's a white male dominated space in private
Yes.
aviation, whether it be the clientele or the people who work within the space, right? And so here you have this black woman with the Chinese last name, coming in and going to run the company. And people are like, who's she? Like, where's she come from? Right. And so there was an adjustment. And the reason why that was important is they were looking at the fact that I was a woman because it hadn't been done up until that point. And then to B, or I'm sorry, that's not true. There was another woman my former boss had actually was an interim CEO for a company. So she was the first one. I was the second one in our industry as far as major private jet companies are concerned. The
Yes.
second thing that they weren't used to is I was not a pilot. So in private aviation, most people who are, especially in the leadership role, they are pilots. They may have a military background. If they're not pilots, they're probably maintenance. They know how to fix planes. So here I am coming in, saying I don't fly the planes, I don't know how to fix the planes, right? Like I don't do
Yeah.
anything that's supposed to be how you get to the top in our industry, and yet here I am. And so, that was the scarier part too, is not knowing how to lead different departments that I just wasn't exposed to, or I was exposed to but didn't. Truth be told, I didn't really care about, right? Like
Yeah.
I remember, I even talked about in the book when I had to sit in meetings that, legal was telling us all the stuff that was going on. And I'm like, oh my God, like, wake me when we're done, right? Because in sales, you're like, it's deals, it's customers, it's competitors, like you're moving at a fast pace. You can tell by my energy, that's the pace I'm used to. And I love it,
Yeah.
right? But now all of a sudden, you could be dealing with something legal that's taken, 3 years in the making kind of thing. So it was a bit of an adjustment. And I had to sit there and really listen because that was my opportunity to learn. In fairness, I'm no longer just leading, salespeople. Now I'm leading everybody. And then I had to learn what was important to each of those groups. Leading pilots, for an example, what they care about is very different than what a salesperson may care about. What legal cares about or operations is very different. So those were all, it was a big growth that I had to experience, me
Yes.
personally, while leading everybody, and while that particular job made me make history. So I was the first black person to in the United States to lead a major private jet company. So all eyes are on you as well as you're trying to learn, understand, change the company, have the history, carry the load of like being the one and only, you know what I mean? So it was
Absolutely.
just a lot going on.
What
There's a lot going on.
what helped you to move into that rather than shrink away from it?
It's interesting because when the opportunity came, I did spend a lot of time thinking about it because my inkling
Hmm.
was to go, you know what, like this is too big of this is a huge jump. Maybe I don't do this. but I knew where the CEO wanted to take the company, and I felt like I could do it. And I also he and I
Yes.
had established a relationship in this process, so I felt like I could be a good support for the vision he was trying to make happen. So that was the first thing, and then the second thing was also just talking to people, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is going to be historical!" Like, are you really thinking about this? Like, get your head in the game and let's take one for the team. Like, right, this for women, this for like, let's go, right? And so when I thought about the magnitude of what this meant for our industry, for our country, it was almost like, how could I not? And so, fearful and all, scared to death and all, I did
Love that.
it.
Now, you've put your experience and your wisdom into this book, Lead People Who Are Not Like You. And it feels like there's, there's many strands of that you want to pull out. But if someone's looking in the bookstore or looking on Amazon and looking for a good read, why is it that they should pick this one up and say, hey, this is something that's going to really add value?
If you want to be able to be a leader that people are beating down the door because they want to come work for you, if you want to be a leader that can truly attract and retain top talent, then you better know how to relate to everybody. And really, what that means is you yourself are going to have to adjust. And so that's really why I wrote the book. I wanted the
Love it.
conversation to go deeper. It wasn't about men, women, black, white, gay, straight. It's not that. It's like all of us. Every single leader is going to be leading people who are not like them. So here's how I did it, in hopes that, this book will help you have some tools to know how to do it as well, because the
Brilliant.
workforce has changed. And either you need to get on this train because the train's left the building, the train's left the tracks, right? So either you got to get on, or you're going to be a leader that's just simply irrelevant because you don't know how to lead today's modern workforce. And the good thing is, we both know that from a diversity perspective, the numbers are clear. The more diverse the team, the better the result, right? So that we don't
Yeah.
have to have a discussion about. But now what we have to have a discussion about is we've not really helped leaders know how to lead people who are not like them. We've talked about you need to lead people who are not like you, but we haven't really given them tools on how to do it. And that's really where I'm focused on with the book.
Super. Yeah, well, I'm sure it'll be a great asset to those that consume it, which is great. Okay, my
Thank
last
you.
question. I want to come back to that 20-year-old version of you. Sounds like it was a great decade for you. But again, as you look back, what advice would you give yourself maybe in your early 20s? What would be the key piece of wisdom you would pass back to yourself then if you were speaking to Stephanie now?
Mm,
Then,
yeah. Yeah, well, I would say two things actually. Don't make a thing a thing. Like that's that's my favorite saying right now. It's like, okay, tell me again why I care about this? Like, don't make a thing a thing. Is this a thing I need to really be, this hyped up on, or is it just like a little thing, right? So don't,
yeah,
in life, don't make a thing and thing. And that's whether it's business, personal life, whatever. The other part that I would say is that every single person that you're going to interact with, they have a purpose and a gift and a talent. And as a leader, that is my job, right? Yes, we've got to get the numbers hit. Yes, we've got to do all the things that you have to do in leadership. But the number one role as a leader is to truly develop those that you've been given influence over, right? Because I think that leadership is a very honorable thing. And I also think it carries a great responsibility.
Steph, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your energy, and I wish you the greatest success as you share the message associated with ally leadership. And I love this idea of ask, listen, learn, and then you take action. That's a big takeaway for me from today. Thank you so much, and
Thank you so much for
hope to get
having
to speak
me.
to you again.
Thank you, Simon.
My
This was
pleasure.
awesome. Best meeting of the day.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us at the After Dinner Leadership Table, and trust that you've got good value from listening to this episode. Thanks for being here. One question for you. The question is, so what? What will you do with what you've just heard? And here's a few suggestions. Number one, lead with more purpose. 2, mentor with patience. 3, share with pride. You think of anyone who you know that would benefit from listening to what you've just heard, that would help them to be a better leader today or in the future. Please share, like, subscribe. It helps other people to consume the content. And we wish you all the very best of success. And please listen again to another After Dinner Leadership Conversation.